My God, this is America. We have a president who has deployed the military who are trained to kill our enemies, not Americans, but our enemies. I mean, I grew up in a dictatorship. And I don't even remember ever witnessing anything like that. To have a democracy, a beacon of hope for the world to now be turned into one of the worst countries where the military are in our streets without any regard for people's constitutional rights, while our president is spending millions of dollars propping himself up like a failed dictator with a military parade. It is really shocking, and it should be a wake-up call for all Americans.
The truth is that Ilhan Omar is an extremely skilled operator. She's very good at casting a narrative that she wants. She probably learned that from her father, is my guess. And she's always been able to manipulate the media and to bring out the Islamophobia card. And though today that's kind of worn out a little bit, we're talking about a time frame of around 2016, 2017, 2018, when it was very much in vogue, and any kind of mention of that kind of terminology would just shut down any kind of discussion. And she knew that. She used that to her advantage in an extremely savvy way, and in a way that is very skilled. Omars were brought or came to America under a refugee program. It gave them special ability to enter the U.S. and to have their pathway to citizenship. And that was presuming that they were not serving in the military or the genocidal military of the country which they came from. It turns out that that was actually the case. This was something that was buried by the so-called fact-checking industry and the mainstream media. They called it misinformation. They called it an anti-Muslim smear. But the reality is that Ilhan Omar's father was a colonel in the Siad Barre regime, as a Marxist-Leninist regime responsible for genocide of a neighboring tribe, and he was a senior official in that very regime. It was a dictatorship, as they generally are, the Marxist-Leninists, and it was extremely repressive, extremely poor, impoverished. But one thing that some other researchers have noted is that in Ilhan Omar's own description of her life there, she talks about living in a compound. She talks about having a car, which was extremely rare at that time. This, for her personally, was actually a life of privilege and power, which obviously accords with the notion that her father was a senior military official in the regime. That's how people within those regimes are treated. They're not treated like everybody else. So she wouldn't have borne the brunt of what the rest of the people living under that repressive rule would have had to endure day to day. She lived a good life, and it's probably only because Siad Barre lost power that they had to flee, because they no longer had the cushy lifestyle. They didn't have the political protection, and it was time to go. They positioned this as them being under threat from this general upheaval, but it was the upheaval caused by the man her father was serving. It was right up until around 1991 that the Barre regime was in power, and it was the civil war that brought it down. And like in any other case, if you are part of the regime that has just fallen, your number one priority is to get yourself and your family out the country. And the other thing to keep in mind is that not anyone could just leave the country. You would have to have significant means, political connections, and a lot of know-how to be able to pull something like that off. This is an extremely poor country. This is, as you said at the beginning of this, one of the poorest countries in the world. There's not infrastructure. There's not embassies that you can just go and apply for a visa or refugee status to another country. And that would have taken significant political influence to pull off, which they clearly had. So again, we see Ilhan Omar, though she positions herself as a victim of this, in reality, she was part of the very regime that was coordinating and organizing all this. And it's exactly that allowed her to flee to the United States to seek shelter and create a new life, and to become a congresswoman within no generations, within the same generation that she arrived in the United States. He was a citizen of Somalia, and he was deported, I think, last December, if I get that right. But that's exactly right. That's something that there is precedent, and this is part of an effort to sort of go after the perpetrators of whatever kinds of crimes they committed as part of that regime, to sort of claw them back. There is a sort of counter movement in the United States of Somali people who are victims of this regime, who are trying to seek justice for their family members, for their friends who were killed by the Siad Barre regime, or who are displaced, or whatever happened to them. So there is actually another side to this, and that's another part of the media's failing on this story, is to not talk to those people, because they're also Black Somalis. They're out there. They just haven't been platformed in the way that Ilhan Omar and her entire group or crew of political operatives in Minnesota have been. And he was found liable in a civil suit for the torture of a Somali herder, and that was why they were able to deport him, because they specifically were able to tie him to an individual crime that was considered to be to invalidate his refugee status in the United States. My guess, again, is that with her father, the story goes much deeper than the surface level that what we've been able to establish so far. The problem with the reporting right now is that we're just trying to undo the damage that Snopes, PolitiFact, and the mainstream media have done. This is part of like a propaganda stew where you don't know the ingredients. You got to like separate them out just to establish the basic facts, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But I think now we're on a pathway where we can actually figure out what he really did. As far as I understand it, it was because they were able to tie him to the specific crime. As I think there was a ICE press release that reads that Ali personally engaged in torture while a lieutenant colonel in the Somali National Army, and he ordered soldiers under his command to detain, torture, and assist in extrajudicial killing. So it was really that they were able to find the specific crimes that he committed, and the fact that he did it in the context of serving as a colonel in the Somali army. From the reporting I've done so far, after this initial story, my sense is that the chances are very good that people know who he was, they remember him, and people in the United States as well who have specific information about his activities. This is not speculation. This is stuff that I'm working on right now. So I think this is something we're going to see unfold, and the story is going to move forward. He cast himself as a so-called teacher trainer. This was the term that kept coming up. I've never heard this term before, teacher trainer. Sometimes it was educator, and it was denied by him. It was a idea that was spread by her as well. But most of the heavy lifting was done by Snopes, the, again, so-called fact-checking website. They relied on some very obscure Minnesotan outlet whose own reporter that made this claim was later sued for misreporting, and that claim became the basis for this entire notion that what they had said was misinformation, that in fact he was a colonel in the Siad Barre regime and not a so-called teacher trainer as she and the rest of the media claimed. The irony of this entire story is that the evidence that he was actually a colonel in the regime came from the Somali American community itself. So Mr. Omar died in 2020 of complications from COVID. And right after he died, there were a lot of obituaries in local Somali language and English language outlets in Minnesota claiming and celebrating the fact that he was a colonel in the regime. They were not ashamed of it. They thought this was something to be proud of. And they wrote these obituaries detailing his service in the Barre regime as a colonel, detailing how he climbed the ranks within the military, detailing his service in various wars under the Barre regime. And eventually this became so overwhelming. It was reported by a number of outlets in the US as well as in Africa, reporting the same information. So what the New York Times and CNN and CBC and the rest of them got wrong, small outlets in the United States who did not have the same agenda were reporting actually truthfully. And that local outlet was written, that story for that local outlet was written by a reporter who was almost sycophantic in his praise and his effusive adoration for Ilhan Omar as this like rising left-wing figure in politics and young and diverse and DEI and all this stuff. And that same reporter was the one who was later sued for a number of misrepresentations. That outlet had to settle that lawsuit. It was the same guy who made these claims. Snopes never mentioned that fact. They didn't investigate that at all, even though it was publicly available information. They just had their claim, calling this misinformation, attaching it to so-called Islamophobia, when in reality it was true. And then what happened is you had this cascade from Snopes. You had PolitiFact making the same claim based on the Snopes claim, based on that one article by this local City Pages Minnesotan outlet. Then Reuters makes the claim, then the New York Times makes the claim, then the networks make the claim. And by that point, if you dare to contradict it, if you dare to even look into it, you get cast as being Islamophobic, as somehow having this misinformation agenda against Muslim people in America. And this is something that clearly warrants further investigation, because if this all bears out, and we have the evidence, we now know that this is actually the case. And the other twist here is that I don't think this is the end of the story regarding her father. I still think there's more out there. I'm working on it right now. I'm hunting down the facts, but I don't think it ends with the so-called his just being a colonel. I think there was much more going on. What we need right now is a proper investigation by the government. This cannot be trusted in the hands of the mainstream media, because they're not going to do the job. Still today, they're going to run cover for Ilhan Omar. So we really need a DOJ investigation to understand exactly what happened, what was put on that immigration application, and what the reality was, and whether that broke the law. I would imagine so, and I would imagine that these documents are readily available to anyone who wants to look into this. But again, this was kind of all it was all just kind of cast under this cloud of Islamophobia, so nobody wanted to touch it. It became toxic and radioactive. And at the time, we remember Ilhan Omar herself was serving on the House Intelligence Committee, and she was thrown off the committee. And that's how bad things got for her right around this period. And it was a lot about her making anti-Semitic remarks, but it was also tied to some of this stuff going on in the background. And again, we don't fully know the truth yet, and I think there's much more to come. But all this stuff, especially being kicked off of that committee, it really signals that there is something serious going on here. And I think we also still need to completely resolve the question of her brother and their marriage. It's still kind of this gray area, and there's an answer out there. My sense is that the answer is that she did actually marry her brother in order to get him papers to the United States. As far as I know, that brother's no longer at the U.S. I believe he's in the UK somewhere. It's unclear. But that actually does need to be resolved one way or the other, and it requires serious investigation, both by the government and by the media. And a lot of this gets really confusing with the different naming conventions that they have in Somalia, which get sort of mixed up, and they use different kind of conventions in different contexts. The other thing is that she has very purposely maintained a lot of ambiguity as to who her siblings are, and even the number of siblings she actually has. So this is kind of a number that fluctuates when she speaks about it differently. And it's really not clear what the definitive number of siblings she has. And again, this is potentially part of some effort to obfuscate on this question, because if this were actually proven out, it would end her political career at the very least. So one of the biggest reports I've done on the Wikipedia stuff involves a group of around 40. There's really about 10 or 12 who are leaders of the group, pro-Hamas. They're editors. They're sort of removing mentions of Hamas crimes, including terror attacks. They're doing the same for Hezbollah. They're sort of whitewashing Hezbollah. They're acting on behalf of the Iranian regime. They're removing human rights abuses listed on Wikipedia. So this is stuff that's done to advance the own interests of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. One of these editors removed any mention of Hamas's genocidal 1988 charter from dozens of Wikipedia articles. This is not something you do just because you're a hobbyist or you're an enthusiast for Hamas. Like, you're doing this in alignment with whether or not that person is directly paid for them or somehow in their employ. It's unknown, but this is aligned exactly with their own objectives and how they try to appear and present themselves to not just the American public, to the world. So the damage is immense, because Wikipedia is not a walled garden. What is on the site doesn't stay on the site. It gets pulled into ChatGPT, into Gemini, into every frontier AI model. It basically populates all of Google on a topic search. It is what feeds into Alexa, into Siri, and what becomes ground truth for most of us without us actually ever knowing that. This is one of the problems with Wikipedia. One of the very big problems is that these editors can sort of sling these accusations, or they can warp a topic area like American politics, or like I reported previously for Pirate Wires, which is they systematically establish this narrative that Trump is a fascist. They did it by relying on outright Marxist sources that consider themselves to be Marxists, but they do it under the protection of anonymity provided by the site. So the site doesn't know who they are. We don't know who they are. They're having this outsized influence on American politics itself. And this is all happening under the sort of aegis of Wikipedia and Wikimedia Foundation, which owns the site, being granted tax-exempt status by the United States government. And the other thing that's going on here, which we do have more insight into, is that I would say a significant portion of the money that Wikimedia Foundation receives from donation, we're talking about $185 million in income a year. A lot of that money gets passed through to radical left-wing NGOs. It functions almost like a cutout. The other piece here is that there's significant ties between Wikimedia Foundation and Hillary Clinton, and also with George Soros, who, again, I reported did a whole story on this. A lot of Soros's most senior people were put into or came to Wikimedia Foundation in 2017, which is right at the time Wikimedia Foundation redefined the mission of Wikipedia from just being an online encyclopedia into becoming a social justice movement powered by DEI.
That's all for today. Thank you. If you want global news to keep you up to date on any new developments, please subscribe our channel and forward our content with your friends on social media and email. Thank you very much for keep supporting me. Stay safe, be blessed. Namaste.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.